Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to be kind of doing a little bit different version of the weekly meta breakdown for the Explore format. So we don't have enough data after the first week to get any kind of new decks emerging within the Explore best of 1 or best of 3 ladder tracked from Untapped. I was looking over the stats and it's largely the same decks that were there. The biggest kind of change thus far is just the new fast lines that came in have been added to a lot of the decks in that regard that were previously missing. But what I did was I scoured through Twitter, Pioneer, MTGO leagues, wherever I could find some new decks, things that were doing well, and kind of ported over. A lot of these are Pioneer decks, so I had to make some changes, but I moved them over to a Explorer-based version. So these will all be best of 3 decks, except for one. You can kind of play around with it if you want to play in best of 1, but I really wanted to just come out today with some decks to give you some ideas of what the new cards are doing in the format. What we'll do is we'll come back next week. Hopefully we have the data, but ideally what we try to do every week is feature the top decks for each of the formats on Arena based on tracked win rate data from Untapped GG. So if you enjoy that type of stuff, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are trying to target 10,000 subs by June, so greatly appreciate it if you can. But we're going to jump into it, and the card that's kind of made the biggest wave across a number of constructed formats all the way back to Vintage is Atraxa Grand Unifier. What was once just an EDH staple, the old Atraxa, this 7-mana card is one of the best reanimation targets you can have. And this deck is going to be a black-red sacrifice deck, like a Witch's Oven deck, that's somehow going to be playing 3 colors that don't play in its mana cost, but I'll explain in a sec. So this Atraxa 7-mana, 7/7, flying lifelink, Death Touch, Vigilance, does your homework, does your taxes. When it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 10, kind of Niv Mizzet Reborn style, and then you get to put one of each creature, or one of each permanent type or spell type in your hand. So it refills your hand. So it's like massive card draw. So what you're trying to do with this deck is to loot it into the graveyard, either with blood tokens or through like the Fable, the Mirror Breaker kind of flip. So you have 8 ways to make blood. You can filter with Fable, the Mirror Breaker to get it into your graveyard. And what you're trying to do is reanimate it with Vat of Rebirth. So this is a new card that came out of the latest set. So 1-mana artifact. Whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you put an oil counter on it. And then for 3 mana, you remove 4 oil counters and you return target creature from your graveyard at sorcery speed. So this allows you to reanimate Atraxa in a shell that's naturally looking to kill its own things. You have your Witch's Oven that can basically trigger it very quickly. Your blood tokens can trigger it. You have Deadly Dispute, which in a pinch, this can also be sacrificed for card advantage. So you kind of have the engine there. You also can just cast this through making treasure tokens between Deadly Dispute and Fable the Mirror Breaker as well. Jangantha Companion. So it's a sacrifice deck with a surprise, here's my 7-mana spell. The sideboard, I got these like from Pioneer dumps of MTGO. So the sideboards are kind of more towards Pioneer. You'll see stuff like Dampening Sphere for the Lotus Field combo, but can be brought in against mono green. But here are the sideboards if you're interested as well. So from one Atraxa deck to another Atraxa deck, this is an Atraxa Transmog deck. So another deck that's looking to cheat Atraxa into play with colors that normally can't cast it. So same idea, your Atraxa's on the top end, but we're trying to use Transmogrify to basically exile a creature token. There's no other creatures in the deck, so we always will find Atraxa in this deck. And this deck's been around in the past where you tried to get Titan of Industry out, and then you could like make copies with it. So that's one of the ways. The thing is, Titan could be cast in those decks. This deck really is only going to be making treasures with Fable the Mirror Breaker or Bankbuster. So it's a little bit more limited in terms of being able to necessarily hard cast the Atraxa in this deck. The way you're making tokens with this deck is like Careful Cultivation, which helps you ramp it out as early as turn 3 for the combo. Nixus, Fable, in a pinch, Bankbuster can, Eska's Chariot, Liliana's Death Majesty as well. So you have all these ways to make the tokens. And then lastly, the card we don't have is Dreadbore, so trying out some Shieldred's Edict in there, some Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, because we're a black-based deck. You could try also like Luca Copper Agent as another way to just have a 5th Transmogrify effect. It also lets you find, like Atraxa finds you a Planeswalker, so it works out well like that. Again, sideboard wise, and I'll post all these deck lists so you could just import them if you'd like. Just like another spattering of removals, stuff like that. Kind of cool against like the humans deck or just like weenie style decks. You have removal for like an opponent's Thalia, and it makes you a token for 1 mana, which is some pretty sweet tech. So the one deck I didn't import, but just kind of let people know, the 4 to 5 color Enigmatic Incarnation decks are now shifting to play 1 copy of Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. So that's just a quick, I wasn't going to import the whole deck, just swap in one of those. This is a deck from Todd Anderson. It is a Golgari Sac deck, and it's built with Tyvar Jubilant Brawler. So Tyvar makes you have your creatures with activated abilities activate them as though they had haste, which means your Llanowar Elves tap for mana right away. Your Priest of Forgotten Gods taps for mana, or like taps to sacrifice right away as well. So allows you to kind of have some shenanigans there. This also lets you do tap on tap, so you can do multiple priest activations. You can do multiple elf ramps. So kind of cool in that regard. And then its minus ability lets you bring back any of your kind of 1 or 2 mana spells, which this deck has a lot of. This is a sacrifice kind of drain deck. So you have Priest as kind of the big engine of the deck. The new card, Vran Executioner Thane. 2 mana 2/2. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This ability triggers only once per turn. So kind of a Blood Artist effect that's been buffed to 2, but it's limited by once per turn. We also have copies of Zulaport Cutthroat to also get you for some drain and gain shenanigans. Lazotep Reaver is 2 bodies in 1, so it's self-enabling for the Priest of Forgotten Gods. You got your Woe Striders, your Lovestruck Beast mixed in to a Collected Company shell. The sideboard, you got Fatal Pushes, Oozes, Canker Blooms, and then Gravelighter's an interesting one. So Todd was mentioning the sideboard wasn't like the most refined. I could see this Gravelighter not being super great, but it's just kind of like you could potentially draw off it, or you can force your opponent to sack a creature. There's probably some better sideboard options out there, but something to start off with as an idea. And then we go to a deck that was for best of 1, came across Timeline. This is a green-white Auras deck. So you have Light Paws and Shram, which are kind of your engines of any Auras deck in Explorer. We don't have Core Spirit Dancer or whatever the other 2 mana one is. But this version is also playing Venerated Rot Priest. So it gives you kind of an alternate win con with poison. With your Auras, you're naturally targeting your spells. So you get to get a whole bunch of triggers from targeting your spells with the Auras. You also have like All Seed for protection, but Cartouche for an extra body, +1/1 in lifelink, Ethereal Armor, Scales for each enchantment you have, Blessing and Tameo Safekeeping for protection, Sentinel's Eye for vigilance and a buff, Audacity for trample and a buff, Sixth Sense for card draw, All That Glitters for buff, evasion, and then kind of pseudo removal. And then Light Paws lets you kind of tutor up in the package there. So this is a best of 1 deck. You can throw together a sideboard, but kind of gives you an idea in that respect. Then we go to the Gruul Boat. Boat's got some updates. So this is kind of the Gruul Aggro Vehicles deck. So it's built around like having Chariot and Sky Sovereign in your main deck. You have a bunch of accelerants in your 1-drop slot. This version here is adding a lot of the decks. These decks have gone 1 to 2 Hadjars. So it's a legendary, good stats on its own, 2 mana, 3/3, good value. You can sacrifice it to give legendary creatures control a buff and indestructible to end a turn. Your vehicles are all legendary, so it protects you in that regard. You still have your Bone Crushers. This version is using the Reckless Stormseekers, as well as Werewolf Pack Leader for card advantage, and then Lovestruck Beast just trimmed down because you're adding in some copies of Miglos. So 3 mana, 4/4. Again, all these creatures are kind of above average on stats, especially if you get them out on turn 2. And then this one gives you just a whole bunch of functionality with removing the oil counters for buffs or kind of artifact enchantment removal. 2 copies of Obliterating Bolt down from the 4 that it previously was. 2 Crone Wars instead of the 4. And this version's opting to have the Ember Cleaves main, which was something that was usually a sideboard consideration for against the mono green Devotion deck. Your vehicles can't crew in front of Karn. So the Cleave while it can re-equipped, the enter the battlefield trigger is not an activated ability. So you can still get the cleave off against mono green. 3 copies of Mutavault down from the 4 because you got the addition of Copperline Gorge, which is another untapped line, which is great for this deck. The sideboard's got a whole bunch of options here. Notably, we have Thrun, Breaker of Silence coming in as another new card in the set. So that's Gruul Boat. I got to pick up some of those cards. I have that deck and paper. And this one was, so this finished 12th in a challenge. I can't really say, this was like one of the only Dimir decks where like the Gruul, I've seen a few different variations put up results. So your mileage may vary on this one, but for the control players out there, so prefacing the cards we're missing from here is Dig Through Time, which is played as a 2-of in Pioneer. Thinking Behold the Multiverse, since you already have Memory Deluge, but it's just another card advantage spell that can be effectively cast for 2 mana through Foretell. This deck's just a bunch of saying no different ways, bunch of counter spells, bunch of removals. Shieldred's Edict helps there, a variety of sweepers, Extinction Event, Ritual Suit, Shadow's Verdict. Your win conditions are Hardcast or Cycle Shark, 1 Hullbreaker Horror, or 1 Hall the Storm Giants. You're really playing this game to take as many turns as possible because you're not going to win in the fastest manner. Sideboard as well, it's got a whole bunch of options. You can build the sideboard different ways. What was interesting in this version, and there's another Dimir version that finished like 20 something. It had like a Kalitas in there, like a more smattering, but this version is playing 4 Blue Sun Twilight in the sideboard to gain control of things. So probably like the gaining control, like the bigger stuff, single matchups like Rakdos, take advantage of things like that. Haven't seen this deck in action, so can't fully state what this is in, but interesting to see this card being played so heavily in the sideboard of the deck. So that's 6 new decks that you can try out and explore. Let me know in the comments if you have a new pet deck, if you've updated anything, what you've been liking the most in this new format. And we'll hopefully be back with some stats next week to buff this up. But like I said, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way to helping out the channel. Costs you absolutely nothing. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one, and take it easy.